Hello, New Prospect. Welcome to RTB 2021 for November the 2nd, 2021. Hope you're doing well today. So our text for today, we have 2 Kings 15 and Hosea 8. Actually, these two texts kind of go together because 2 Kings 15 actually is starting to provide some of the historical background for what we're seeing in Hosea and also for Amos and some of these other 8th century prophets, but specifically Hosea and Amos, who are Northern Kingdom prophets. So then we have Titus 1, and then finally Psalm 123 through 125. I got my Bible open to Amos, or I'm sorry, to Hosea. So why don't we start there with Hosea chapter 8. So this is kind of starting a new section in Hosea, which is some proclamations by Hosea, accusations by Hosea against the northern kingdom of Israel. And of course, he's speaking for Yahweh here. And he's speaking directly to the really chaotic situation that's in the northern kingdom at this time. So remember that in the northern kingdom, we had a fairly stable reign and long reign on the part of Jeroboam II. That brought us into the 8th century BC. But then after the reign of Jeroboam, as we'll read about in just a minute, you had a series of succession of different kings, one after the other, and one seemed to be killing off the other. And this is leading up to the ascendancy of the Assyrian Empire, that's adding even more instability to the nation. The nation really doesn't know how to handle Assyria. They're so powerful, so dominant, so violent, and so fearsome as a people, and they are dead set on controlling that region of Israel in the northern kingdom. And of course, Israel's kind of the first in the line of fire. Judah comes next, obviously, because they're south, but Assyria is coming in from the north, coming down, marauding down through that land. And you can imagine being a common person during this time and not having the safety, for instance, of being in a walled city. And you don't know from one minute to the next if marauding Assyrians will come over to the rise of the hill and come and take your land and take your life and maybe even remove you from the promised land. But of course, all this is coming, all this punishment in the form of the Assyrian Empire is coming not because the Assyrians are powerful, but because they are being used by God as a means of judgment on his northern kingdom people. And by the way, you see here Assyria being referred to even in this text. The nation's referred to in verse 1 as this eagle. By the way, a little bit of trivia here: the word for eagle in Hebrew can also be translated as the word for vulture. And so here we have this eagle or a vulture, this enemy coming against the house of the Lord. And why? Why is this happening? Not because Assyria is more powerful, not because Israel is not politically astute or whatever. It is because they have transgressed my covenant, and because of this, they're going to experience that great judgment. The judgment will be like verse 13, a return to Egypt. Is almost a reversal of the Exodus itself, where they are being removed and will be removed from their land. And they now, verse 8, they now will be among the nations. So this is all leading up to, remember, this is focused on the northern kingdom, who will go into exile in 722 BC and will basically never be a kingdom again. And so they will be taken over by the Assyrians, and Judah will survive, but the northern kingdom will not. And it's all because of their disobedience to the covenant. They are saying with their mouth, my God, we of Israel know you. But in actuality, verse 3, they have rejected him. And they have, because of this, they will have this enemy, the enemy of the Assyrians, pursuing them. So Hosea 8, not a very positive message, is it, this time in Hosea. Let's go over to, while we're talking about Israelite history, let's move over to 2 Kings 15. And if you notice here, this is kind of a recapping of both Israel and Judah, and it's kind of going back and forth. And it's really the effect here, I think, of the author's recording of this history is not to give us a whole bunch of details on what happened, but basically the effect is to show the the disarray among the kings. In fact, if you read back in Hosea, one of the things it says is that they've set up these kings that God didn't call. And basically these kings are setting up themselves because they are the ones who are going, and it seems like one king, as I stated, one king, as soon as he gets set up, he gets killed off. I think there's like 4 kings in 1 year even after Jeroboam. So you got Jeroboam and then these next kings that come after him. Now, contrast this, Jeroboam is reigning a little bit before, but it is also paralleling in the south a reign of a long reign of a king named Uzziah, also called Azariah in the text. And he reigns a long time. We don't have a lot of detail on his reign. We do see that, for instance, he did ride in the sight of the Lord, but didn't remove the high places once again. We have a little bit more detail about him in the book of Chronicles, where it states that, and it even refers to this here, but it states the reason why he became leprous was because he actually went and offered incense in the temple, which he should not have done, had pride in his heart and his life, and that's the reason why he was judged with leprosy. But he still reigned a long time. So there's a little bit more stability in the south at this time, but in the north, not much at all. And this is leading to ultimately the last king in the northern kingdom is being referred to here as Hoshea. And this takes us down to about the time of the exile. We'll read about the exile in 2 Kings 17 in just a few days. Last thing I'll say is that this is the first time in the text where the Assyrians are really there's a lot of detail on the Assyrian Empire and what they're going to be doing to try to take control of the Israelites. Again, remember the author's purpose of First and Second Kings is to show how did we get here? Why did we get here? Well, here's a great chapter that shows that they were a nation that had deserted their God, had tried to name their own kings, and had not followed after the covenant that God had established with them. So, not a very positive text either, is it? Let's move over to the book of Psalms. Psalm, I believe 123 through 125 is our text. So in Psalm 123 through 125, we're continuing in on the Psalms of Ascent. Remember, the Psalms of Ascent are Psalm 120 through 134. And these 3 Psalms that we look at today are all in that category. And you see kind of the same themes that are coming to the forefront with these Psalms. You have the themes of anticipation of being in God's presence, the theme of, even in verse 1 of Psalm 123, it's talking about, I lifted my eyes, just kind of like what we saw in Psalm 121, where he also lifted up his eyes. Those are lifting up your eyes, not just describing the motion, but you're lifting up your eyes in anticipation for what God will do. Psalm 123 is probably more of a psalm of lament, I think, maybe a corporate lament. Psalm 124 would be more of a psalm of thanksgiving. In fact, it begins, this is of these 3, this is my favorite one here, because it has this repetition of this phrase, had it not been for the Lord who was on our side, had it not been for the Lord who is on our side. Twice it repeats that. Obviously, the psalmist is trying to emphasize that. And I have a little note that I'd written from, I don't know how long ago it was. And it says, I can say this many times in my life, and I'm sure that many of you could probably say the same. Had it not been for the Lord who is on our side, then what would have happened? And of course, you can think of many instances in the history of Israel where they could probably say the same thing. We would have been dissolved as a nation if it hadn't been for the Lord who was on our side. And the Lord, Psalm 125, this psalm of confidence, the Lord surrounds his people. And I know many of you have felt that even in recent days, that the Lord is surrounding you with his protection and power. And thus he is worthy, Psalm 125, verse 1, of our trust. One other thing, you might have a structural device here where you have an inclusio in verse 8 of Psalm 124, the God who made heaven and earth. That goes back to, it's kind of framing these Psalms with Psalm 121, which also verse 2 states, who made heaven and earth. But of course, this idea of God being the creator of all things is the ground of his sovereignty, of his power, and of course, that gives us the reason why we can trust in him. It's Psalm 123 through 125. And then finally, we have Titus 1. So we're moving it into a text, once again, that we've dealt with before in Titus. And just to kind of review, Titus is one of the pastoral epistles. So we have 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. These are what are known as the pastoral epistles, being addressed to pastors, to Timothy and Titus. Timothy was at Ephesus, most scholars believe, and Titus, we know, was on the island of Crete. In fact, Paul even refers to this in verse 5 of this text. And Titus is being assigned one primary role on the part of Paul, and that is to oversee the work of the overseers. So if you look at verse 5, he is to appoint elders in every city. And there's a reason for that. Verse 10, the ground of the reason why he's going to appoint these elders of having a certain character. And by the way, that you read through the character traits here, it's very similar to what we find in the letter of 1 Timothy. What's the reason for that? For there are many rebellious men, empty talkers, and deceivers. In other words, false teachers, especially those of the circumcision. So these are probably those, again, who are claiming that to be a true believer in Jesus, you have to have Jesus plus something else. And so he is to engage them, he's to confront them, and he is to reprove them severely, verse 13. And why? Ultimately, so that they will be of sound faith. So it's the reproving in order to restore them, but you can't let them keep on going, Paul tells Titus here. So Paul's giving Titus some specific directions here. By the way, this is probably written sometime in the mid-60s. So again, one of Paul's latter letters in his life, although there's no indication that he's in prison here. Maybe he is on one of his missionary journeys or in another city. But this is his instructions to Titus, chapter 1 of this book, this letter. So I think that's it. Yeah. Titus 1, Hosea 8, Psalm 123 through 125, and 2 Kings 15. Great. Hope you all have a great rest of the day on this day, November 2nd, 2021.